Good evening, welcome both to our attendees physically here in the room at the Royal Society. A warm welcome to our first speaker. There we are, we're fingertip control, brilliant, fantastic, excellent. And welcome also to our online participants. And our online participants will be able to join in the Q&A on Slido. And for our people physically in the room, you have an option. If you want to use your mobile and start engaging via Slido, you're welcome to do so. And alternatively, and so for Slido, the code, I should read this out, is hash 9578078. 9578078. But equally, I will also be looking at people raise their hands as well, in the old-fashioned physical way. And if you are speaking physically, remember to unmute as well. So now let's turn to our discussion of nuclear. It's great that we've got a panel of 4 formidable experts on new nuclear and the UK energy strategy, following on from the April 2022 publication by the government of its energy strategy, which envisages raising nuclear generating capacity to 24 gigawatts by 2050. I was over the weekend at a conference in America with French experts who are very proud of the day in 1975 when President Pompidou in the morning decided to invest in train grande vitesse, and in the afternoon decided to invest in a network of civil nuclear reactors. That is a good day's work at the office. That's what it looks like. And of course, that is what Boris dreams of. That is the type of Prime Minister Boris would love to be. Anyway, we're now going to see what the chances are of actually delivering an increase in expansion of new nuclear power. Our first speaker, Julia Pyke, is Director of Financing for Sizewell C. So she is engaging in identifying innovative ways of financing Sizewell C. Before that, she was Head of Power and Renewables for UK, US and Europe at Herbert Smith. And she's a Fellow of the Energy Institute. Julia, thank you very much. Over to you.
Thanks very much. So, I started advising Hinkley in 2006 at Herbert Smith, and although people talk about is Hinkley late, the answer is that it wasn't allowed to start building until 2016. So when people talk about Vincent Rivas's ill-fated remark that we'll be cooking our Christmas turkeys in 2017, I think it would have been some pretty raw turkey, given that the oven didn't get turned on till 2016. So the build of Hinkley is actually going very well. For a UK mega project, it's a huge success story. It's running probably only about 6 months behind schedule, other than the intervention of COVID, which, as with everybody, COVID has impacted progress at Hinkley through their having much lower numbers and through impacting the factories making the kit. But Hinkley is, although seldom reported this way, actually a huge success story and it's a particular success story because it's a first-of-a-kind nuclear reactor in a generation in the UK. But when we talk about what's the future of nuclear in the UK's energy system, we have to recognise that the future of the energy system is going to be predominantly intermittent and predominantly provided by renewables. So Hinkley could be physically flexible, but the contract for difference makes it economically inflexible. It's going to get £92.50 if it puts electricity onto the national grid, and if it were, for example, to divert electricity to hydrogen electrolysis, which might be what the system needs from time to time in the future, it's not going to get paid £92.50. So it's economically inflexible. So when we started looking at Sizewell, and we started by looking at what the appetite was for more gigawatt nuclear. So one set of issues is, can we make a success of gigawatt nuclear in the UK? You won't be surprised to hear that I think the answer to that is yes. And we'll come on to that in a minute. But we had to look at it much more broadly than that. What's the appetite for more gigawatt nuclear, for more baseload power in an increasingly intermittent system? So one of the primary things that we did in thinking about Sizewell is to make it economically flexible. And it's economic flexibility allied to physical flexibility, has led us to an availability payment. Sizewell will be paid to be available. It won't be paid for putting megawatt hours onto the grid. So it will put megawatt hours onto the grid if that's what the system wants in 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years' time. Or it will be configured so that it can put its electricity into non-grid uses. So it's be able to send its electricity to, for example, hydrogen electrolysis, which it could co-power with renewables. And that's good for everybody because it's good for electrolyser life cycles. It's good for making sure that you've got something going into the electrolyser when it's not windy. It's good for everybody. It gives something to do with the power when the national grid doesn't want to take that quantity of power from Sizewell. And then the thing that we've done additionally is to make sure that we've remembered that nuclear is a huge heat machine. So nuclear is a huge heat machine from which we have habitually in the UK made grid-scale electricity. That's not what people have done with nuclear in countries which have valued heat more highly. So in Finland, in Sweden, in Russia, in China, nuclear is used for district heating. So for Sizewell, we are putting in valves to take out steam at around 270 degrees before it hits the turbine. And we can take out around about 400 megawatt thermal without significantly impacting electrical output. So that heat is cheap. Obviously, there's the cost of putting in the valves, the cost of taking the heat to where we need the heat. But in a world in which cheap, low-carbon heat is at a premium, we can provide a very useful service. So I'm not an engineer, I'm not a scientist. So you can don't direct to me your challenges around. Am I absolutely sure there'll be absolutely no impact on electrical output? But I'm reliably informed that will be the case. You say, what can you do with 400 megawatt thermal heat at 270 degrees? So we are looking at a variety of things. We are looking at heat-assisted electrolysis for hydrogen to make it cheaper. So Suffolk is an absolutely brilliant place to make a lot of hydrogen. In the Sizewell beach, such as our electricity system, we're likely to end up with around about a third of the UK's power coming in onto that beach. If there's a good place to make hydrogen, it's there. It's close to Felixstowe and to Harwich. Sizewell C is actually part of the Felixstowe Freeport East initiative, precisely because we'll be able to provide clean heat and power and hydrogen. And actually, ports, as it happens, have one of the first use cases for hydrogen at scale because port vehicles exist in a hydrogen-driven form. We are also looking at heat-powered desalination. Suffolk's incredibly arid. Last year, the East Suffolk region where Sizewell is located reduced the water abstraction licences by 30%. This is a huge issue for farmers. If we have heat with which we can do economic desalination, we should do it. And then we are funded by BEIS to develop a novel heat-powered direct air capture prototype. And this prototype is developed with Nottingham University, with Strata, and with Babcock. So it's a UK-developed prototype. And the idea of our nuclear heat-powered direct air capture prototype is that it will roughly halve the cost which Climeworks is currently charging for electrically powered direct air capture, because it's heat convection and it uses almost no electricity. And our 400 megawatt thermal of heat is cheap. So those are all very exciting ideas around how can we help Sizewell fit into the flexible future. And as well as sort of the moral imperative to make the most use you can of a large asset, which is going to have an operating life of at least 60 years, in reality probably 80, it's also much more attractive to people who are looking at investing. The financial community has never invested in project nuclear. We're very confident that they will. At the moment, I'm in the middle of leading a process to get an indicative rating. So we expect to get an indicative investment grade rating for the debt, which means we'll be able to raise the vast quantities of the order of £20 billion of debt that we'll need. And we're confident that we'll be able to raise the equity. However, it is the first time. And having the opportunity to get in at the start on technologies like heat-assisted hydrogen and light direct air capture, and possibly being able to be part of the future in which new housing is district heated, is very exciting for people, and it's actually more attractive to a lot of people in the investment community than the nuclear itself. Although obviously the nuclear itself is the main point of what we're doing. So if I turn to just a couple of other themes briefly, Hinkley has 2 units, and it's going well. And Unit 2 is going better than Unit 1, as you would imagine, because like all humans building nuclear power stations do it better the second time. And we are intending that Sizewell is effectively Hinkley Units 3 and 4. And to achieve this, we have done the following things. We have insisted that the design is replicated. So except insofar as we have to change the marine works because it's a different sea level, it's a different marine environment, and we have a differently shaped plot plan, so we have a slightly differently shaped dry fuel store. It is an exact replication. We have a no change committee. If any engineers bring forward optimization, saying if only we changed this, this would be a bit better, they are repressed. So we can't afford change. And we have also agreed with the government that we're going to use the Hinkley supply chain. If people talk about nuclear as though it's all built by the developer, it's all built by Hinkley, it's all built by Sizewell, of course it isn't. That's a layer on top of a 8,000 person supply chain. And so it's absolutely critical that we are able to reuse the Hinkley supply chain, because guess what? Just as we have learnt, so have they. And so BEIS has agreed that we are able to use the same supply chain. And I'm delighted to tell you that I think 90% of the content of Sizewell will be UK through life, which is a very impressive figure. So we are very much hoping to get our development consent order on the 8th of July. We are delighted to see that the government yesterday published the designation criteria under the regulated asset-based model, which I'll turn to briefly in a moment as to what it is, why am I talking about it. But it means that it means that the government has published, subject to consultation, it regards Sizewell as value for money and is inclined to award it a regulated asset-based licence. And we today have seen the Secretary of State announce that the government will take a special share in all future nuclear, so that we don't have security concerns around who is able to come in and own nuclear power stations. And personally, I think that's an excellent move and something I very fully support. So why the regulated asset-based model? So as well as the Christmas turkeys, why couldn't you build it in the 1 year you were given after the government gave you the go-ahead that gets thrown at Hinkley? We also have the isn't it ludicrously expensive, £92.50, at a point where today offshore wind is, can be more like 50. So what are we doing? What's nuclear for? Is it the same as offshore wind? Is it apples for apples? It's not apples for apples. What are you buying when you buy a nuclear power station? What you're buying is you're buying energy security. So we're very much hoping to have, well, we have committed to have the fuel made in the UK, and we're very much hoping to be able to explore the re-enrichment of existing UK uranium stocks, which would give us in operation a 100% UK supply chain and energy security. And you are obviously buying electricity which is not weather dependent, and you're buying a machine which is able to maximise its output of heat if you can make the safety case to take out more than 400 megawatt thermal. So that's a task. It's a task we haven't yet started to undertake, but 400 megawatt thermal is a lot. 400 megawatt thermal with our direct air capture technology would offset all of today's rail industry emissions. So 400 megawatt thermal, pretty much free, is a very good thing. So yes, why is nuclear then expensive? If we think it is expensive, if we think that what we're buying is exactly equivalent to wind. First of all, it isn't exactly equivalent to wind. It's doing a different job. It's doing a different job in the system. Second of all, why was it £92.50? So £92.50, sort of £11 to £13 is the actual cost of construction. £20 is the cost of operation, including fuel and including decommissioning. What's the rest of the money for? The rest of the money is because, as I said, I started advising on this in 2006, and the contract for difference model won't pay EDF a penny until the station turns on in 2027. So that's one hell of a credit card bill if you roll it up for all of that time. 21 years of interest on considerable quantities of money that EDF is spending in the UK on this power station, which in itself has, I think, 70% UK content, so it's heavily UK dominated. And that cost of money is made up of two things. It's made up of all of that rolled up interest, and it's made up of the cost of capital if you require the developer to take all risks, including risks which are effectively imposed upon you by government, or are the risks of a pandemic, or are the risks of Brexit. You think it's a good thing or it's a bad thing, but it certainly had an impact. All of those risks sit with EDF. So in looking at Sizewell, there's an imperative to make Sizewell cheaper. You make Sizewell cheaper in two ways. First of all, you reduce the capital cost. You reduce that by not doing the design again. We're not doing the design again. By using the same supply chain, so the supply chain doesn't have to do what's called qualify. If you want to supply safety critical equipment into a nuclear power station, you go through a very lengthy process to prove that your equipment can perform under high stress circumstances and prove to the ONR that you are a fit supplier. It's a high cost to qualifying your equipment. So you don't have to do that again. So that's all the saving, and obviously we'll do it better because this will be the third time we've built the exact same design. And so the capital cost will be lower, but the vast majority of the cost is the cost of the money. So the cost of the money will be lower in a regulated asset-based model for the following reasons. First of all, you don't roll up interest. So as for any asset built under a regulated asset base, so that's the whole of our electricity transmission system, it's all of our water industry, it's our airports, it's very common, it's how how many critical infrastructure are provided. It was put in place basically at privatisation in order to induce the private sector to come into critical infrastructure. So you don't roll up interest. The lenders will be paid interest on their debt through construction, and the equity will receive a small return through construction. And those things, for Sizewell, will amount to an amount which is between pence per household per year and round about £1 per household per month at the height of construction. When Sizewell turns on, it will save households in itself, in our modelling, which uses the Bayes model and the Bayes assumptions. It will save it sort of somewhere between £30 to £50 per household per year, because an electricity system with the right amount of nuclear in it, which is a renewables-dominated system with the right amount of nuclear, is a cheaper system. So far from being expensive, it's expensive as a unit item because you're building 7% of the nation's electricity in 2 fields. It's expensive to do that, but your household bills will go down. This is a very little understood phenomenon. And I've probably talked for long enough. All in all, I'd say it's a, Sizewell C is going to be good. It's going to be British. It's going to be owned, we hope, predominantly by British pension funds, partly by the British government. EDF's only going to retain a 20% stake. So we can look at this in many ways as being the effective renationalisation of what was the British energy capability privatised in, I think, the early 90s. And I very much look forward, hopefully, to development consent order on the 8th of July and starting to build.
Very good. Thank you very much, Julia. Let's go straight on to our second speaker, Sophie Macfarlane-Smith. She's Head of Customer Engagement for Rolls-Royce SMR. She joined the reactor physics team of Rolls-Royce in 1996. She's worked on multiple sectors, including submarines. And welcome. Thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here to speak to you all. The first thing I should probably say is, even though I have a background in submarine reactors, I can tell you a civil nuclear reactor is very, very different from a submarine reactor. So what we are not doing in Rolls-Royce SMR is taking a submarine reactor and putting it on land. That would be a bit of a silly thing to do, both economically and practically. So I do have a few slides, but I will just go through very quickly. What I want to talk about this afternoon is how Rolls-Royce SMR are contributing to the energy security strategy and the net zero strategy for the UK, but not just for the UK, but also the rest of the world as well. And as we've talked about, my name's Sophie Macfarlane-Smith. I'm in Rolls-Royce SMR Limited. Now, first of all, for anyone out there who's wondering why on earth a car manufacturer is getting involved in making nuclear power stations, first of all, sadly, it's been quite a few years since Rolls-Royce made cars, And secondly, for those who don't know, Rolls-Royce has been involved in designing and manufacturing and operating small nuclear plants for over 60 years for the UK submarine programme. So we have significant experience in manufacturing reactors. If you go to Derby, we have several manufacturing plants, we have test facilities that we run in the country. And we have taken that expertise, that knowledge of how to design and operate small nuclear plants, and now translated that into the civil world. But we're not alone. As you can see there, Rolls-Royce is the majority shareholder in the Rolls-Royce SMR Limited company, but we do have other shareholders. So we have Constellation Energy, who were previously known as Exelon, the US energy utility company. They run the majority, have a very significant fleet of nuclear plant that they operate in the US. And we also have BNF Resources and the Qatar Investment Authority as our shareholders. So again, just a quick overview of why on earth is Rolls-Royce doing civil reactors. Now, what I'm not going to talk about is why we need nuclear reactors, because I think hopefully most people in the room are aware that the world, the UK and the world, has a very significant challenge with respect to decarbonisation. And most solutions for decarbonisation, whether it's for electricity, heating or transport, most solutions that we currently have in place need electricity, and they need lots and lots of electricity at vast scale. And therefore, we understand, hopefully, again, I hope you'll agree with me, that nuclear power can generate vast quantities of low-carbon power very efficiently. And therefore, the question is not, do we need nuclear power as part of our solution, but actually, how do we get more of it as quickly as possible and as affordably as possible? And that is the challenge that we face in the world today. How can we roll out this technology that we know is good, that Julia's talked about, is already working in operation in the UK and around the world for decades? How can we get more of it as fast as possible? And this is what Rolls-Royce SMR is doing. So Rolls-Royce is looking at a new way of bringing nuclear power to the market. And we believe the best way to achieve this is to use proven nuclear technology, proven pressurized water reactor technology that's in operation today around the world, but delivering it in a different way, delivering it as a standardized manufactured product, turning it into a commodity from a one-off infrastructure project. And the UK and Rolls-Royce SMR is doing just that. We're turning nuclear power from a mega infrastructure project into a manufactured commodity. And how are we doing that? Well, for one thing, we're looking at not just the nuclear island. So we are not a traditional technology vendor. We are actually delivering the complete power station rather than just the nuclear island. And we are delivering it in a modularized way. So just to talk about this modularization approach, we're taking the whole of the power station that you can see up there and chunking it into different modules, around 1,600 modules. If you can imagine the whole power station chunked up into what we might call Lego bricks. That's exactly what we're doing. And each of these modules has a different function, and each of these modules is road transportable. So what we're doing is we're making sure, how can we manufacture this in a repeatable way? How can we deliver this in the simplest, most cost-effective way possible, i.e. through roads, so we don't need to build new infrastructure where we're going to build the plant? And then how can we assemble this in the most cost-efficient way? And again, just some pictures, because I don't want to dwell on this particularly, but what we're talking about is setting up new facilities, manufacturing facilities, to manufacture these different modules that we have. And then all of these modules will be transported to our site assembly factory, which is covered, so we're protected from the weather, and then we can actually build our modules, assemble our modules into the overall power station on site. So again, this is taking proven technology, but delivering it in a new way that actually means that it becomes economically viable. And again, just some more examples of some of the types of modules that we have. And what's it for? Julia described very well what nuclear is for. It's for electricity, but it's not just for electricity. A lot of the world's decarbonisation needs more than just electricity. We're talking about making different types of fuels for synthetic aviation fuel, which, as you would imagine, for aircraft is something that Rolls-Royce is very interested in. So we need vast quantities of synthetic fuels for the aircraft industry, also for the marine industry. We need hydrogen for all sorts of different applications. We're looking at district heating and cooling. We talked about direct air capture. So there are so many different uses for this type of low carbon power and the heat and the electricity that nuclear can produce. And actually, there are many, many customers that are looking at this power. So when we talk about grid electricity, obviously the government and the national infrastructure is really important, but there are huge numbers of industries that are looking for solutions to decarbonise their industrial landscape. And actually, most of those are looking at heat or electricity needs. And they have done the maths for themselves, and they've realised that actually they can only go so far with wind and solar. So actually, they've come to the conclusion if they really want to decarbonise their sector, they're going to have to go nuclear. And now they're looking at, well, how can we do that? And that's where SMRs in particular can step in, because SMRs, being smaller in size and lower power output and can be more flexibly placed. So they can actually go in places where large nuclear can't go at the moment. And they can support more industrial sectors to decarbonise, or they can be used very much to replace existing coal or gas infrastructure. So actually, they can be used for a complete variety of things. So what are the challenges? So today we're here talking about the challenges of nuclear and going for nuclear. And again, we aren't complacent about what we're trying to do, but the challenges are not around licensing. So everyone talks about, oh, nuclear is difficult to license. Actually, if you make a design decision to use standard technology, pressurized water reactor technology that almost every regulator in the world knows and understands and already uses, and if you make the decision to use standard fuel, actually your licensing risk is particularly low. And obviously we're very fortunate in the UK, as a UK company with experience of designing nuclear plant in the UK, we understand the UK regulatory regime very well. But we're not just designing this plant for the UK, we're designing it for the world. But licensing is not particularly a risk. Manufacturing, is manufacturing a risk? Well, not really to Rolls-Royce. We've had 60 odd years of making nuclear plants for the submarines programme, and we've had over 100 years of manufacturing complex products for industry, not just in the UK and around the world. So manufacturing is not really what we would consider a risk. And construction, again, construction's not what we would consider a risk, or assembly as we call it in our process. So we're not thinking of assembly as a problem. We understand that the plant is actually designed for ease of assembly. And also we're using assembly techniques that our construction partners use readily today in other sectors. So we're not inventing something new. We're taking technology that's used in other sectors and bringing it to the nuclear sector. And also for us, the challenge is not really financial as well. So again, 2 billion for a power station is obviously an awful lot of money, but actually it's a value that is investable, we believe is investable on the open market. On the standard market, and because we have delivery certainty, again, it makes it a more attractive prospect for either financial investors or for companies and industries who are looking for a solution to their power needs. So money is not necessarily the challenge that we have. So what do we see as the challenges coming for us? Sites. The UK has designated a certain number of sites for nuclear at the moment. Great. Can we please know which ones we're going to be allocated, same as other nuclear technologies that want to build new sites? We need to know very quickly which sites that we can use so we can get on and develop those projects. We also need more sites. And this is not just an issue in the UK. Of course, we want to build on the sites that exist at the moment, but our prospective customers, usually industrial customers, actually, they want SMRs near to their own facilities. They want more sites to be allocated, so we need lots more sites to be allocated. The other thing we need is faster site permitting. So again, even though you have a site and you've been through your generic licensing, obviously you need to go through your site-specific licensing and your site permitting. And we all know, and poor Julia knows this better than any of us, I think, how long that process takes. 8 years. Yes. If we can manufacture 2 or 4 plants per year in our facilities, but then we have to have them sat waiting before we can actually build, then we completely destroy the economics of the manufacturing approach. So if we really want to speed this up, we need to understand how to do site permitting as fast as we can manufacture. And we're not talking about cutting corners, because in the manufacturing process you don't cut corners, because then you wouldn't have a product that works. What you do is you find the most efficient way to get the result that you need. So collectively as an industry, it's one of the things with government that we're all looking at in terms of how we can move forward with site permitting. And then the final challenge that we have, and this may sound strange, given that we haven't actually built our first plant yet, but our real concern is scale. The demand that we see from within the UK and outside the UK in terms of the export market, specifically to support decarbonisation and the energy security needs around the world, is vast. And we have significant interest in near-term deployment, not just in the UK and outside. So the question for us is how fast can we scale up our manufacturing facilities to be able to deliver and support the demand that we see coming in. And that's something we're already starting to tackle, even as we set up our first facilities, is how do we manage the growth that we see in this market. So hopefully I've given you a little bit of an overview of what we're doing and the challenges we face, and I look forward to answering any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Our next speaker is John Cordroy. He's the GDF Technical Director for Nuclear Waste Services, the delivery body for the UK's Deep Geological Disposal Facility, and he has a key responsibility for the final disposal of the nation's stockpile of high-level radioactive waste. John, over to you.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to come and talk a little bit about the GDF programme. I've been with the programme about 6 years now, although it's been around in various guises since the 80s in the form of NIREX. NDA owned it for a while, my previous company, Radioactive Waste Management. As of earlier this year, we formed up with another NDA subsidiary, and we're now Nuclear Waste Services, and we're committed to working this programme that was first pointed at in 1976 by Sir Brian Flowers in the Flowers Commission on the Environment. So it's something for the nuclear industry to really think about, why someone with the foresight in 1976 pointing at a programme that needs to be delivered, and we're still here in 2022 making good progress on the sites, but only recently have we stepped into that domain. So a lot of the context there, the waste that we have in the UK comes from a whole variety of activity that traces back since the 1940s. We started generating waste. We have, if there's a gold medal for the stockpile of radioactive waste, we'd be kind of probably on the top of the podium, and not least because we've dabbled in everything as a nation. So it's not only the scale of our inventory, it's its complexity, and everything in the inventory needs a solution. So we've got a pretty big challenge of disposing of it. We've got waste stored all over the country, as you can see there. Not an immediate problem now, but it's not fair. And what I mean by that is, imagine if every year a chunk of your tax was for you to store and look after something that was generated 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. Absolutely no use to you, not doing anything, but you're still paying for it. So the purpose of disposing of the waste as opposed to storing the waste is to address this intergenerational equity, bring back a bit of intergenerational fairness. We shouldn't expect future generations to carry on paying to store the waste that was generated a long time ago and will be generated now. We've been through various ranges of sort of policy work on geological disposal. The policy that we run on now was launched in 2018. It came about from a very thorough look at the previous process that closed down in 2013. Communities are at the heart of it. We're in a voluntary, consent-based world. We're looking for communities who can look beyond the immediate tissue rejection of why would I want radioactive waste in my environment, to people who start to see the benefits that the programme will bring. Jobs, investment, long-term economic activity, very sort of steady enterprise for the right community to take on. Just to make sure we all know roughly what I'm talking about in terms of a geological disposal facility, this waste that stays active and dangerous for thousands of years, some of it up to hundreds of thousands of years, the deep geological barriers, somewhere in the region up to 1,000 metres deep, provide the adequate control of that waste, and we can put it in a facility. So at the right-hand side of the screen there, we're talking an area 5 by 5, 6 by 6 kilometres, about 1,000 metres beneath the seabed, engineered vaults and tunnels. That's where the waste goes. Surface facilities, nothing too dramatic, not heavy industrial use, about a square kilometre. The waste is packaged to be passively safe in other facilities, such as Sellafield. So this is a logistics facility, bringing in waste from around the country, moving it to depth, putting it into the right vaults and tunnels, and then eventually, after a very long period of operations, over 100 years, the facility is sealed up. But that's, in essence, that's what a deep geological repository is all about. Policy is working well for us now. We've probably got the most vibrant process going that we've had for some time. This was built on the back of looking internationally at what was working elsewhere. NIREX days was a decide, announce, defend type policy. The 2008 to 2013 policy was very rigid from a community perspective. It sort of drove them down. They felt they were being marched down a line at a predetermined pace. So a very flexible policy for us now, and I'll mention the communities we've got in just a second. Internationally, it is really the only game in town for disposal of large, complex inventories. There are plenty of other options for the lower end of the spectrum, near surface disposal. There's options being developed, deep borehole disposal, that could accommodate certain niche products. But when you look at our inventory, even when you look at the size, some of the packages we're talking, 6 cubic metre concrete boxes, 50 tonnes a piece. They're not going down a borehole, well, not with anything that we can think of today. So all, work very closely with a lot of these international waste management organisations. Finland is the front runner at the moment. They've constructed the first part of their facility. They're doing final commissioning work next year, and then they'll be into operations, and they're disposing of Finland's inventory of spent fuel. SKB in Sweden, not too far behind. The French programme, CIGEO project near Bure, they'll probably be in operations towards the end of this decade. Switzerland, it'll be interesting to watch this year. They're announcing their site. They've gone down a different policy of find the site they want and tell society that's where it's going to be. And Canada's, again, just coming out of a long site selection process. They had a lot of communities volunteer, over 22, I think, and they're getting down to their final choice. So we're in good company, but as the nation that started the atomic age, I feel it personally is something that we really should keep this programme in focus, because it helps all of us. It gives us, I think of it as giving us the licence to operate. If we can close the back end of the fuel cycle with a permanent disposal solution that terminates the liability, terminates future human activity, then I think we're doing a really good thing. Just wanted to mention this sort of, in terms of the theme of the energy strategy that's just been announced, the shift up to an aspiration for 24 gigawatts. How does that affect the GDF programme? It's pretty easy to accommodate it. We're talking about a geological footprint increasing from perhaps 5 by 5 kilometres to about 6 by 6 kilometres. We already, in the policy that was set in 2014, had 16 gigawatts baked into our programme, along with a lot of other items that are still in debate as to whether they represent wastes or not, so things like depleted uranium. So we've all long had a pretty large inventory in our sites, and it's very modular. You don't build the GDF, commission it and turn it on. You build the first capabilities you need, and then just like a mine, it evolves over the next 100 or more years. So very flexible as to the number of vaults and disposal facilities that you build in a GDF. So the answer is 24 gigawatts is, no specific challenge for GDF, and we're at the early part of the design program, so very easy to accommodate that type of change. Just to give you some sort of sense of this is real, we've now got 4 communities in the process, 2 areas of Copeland in West Cumbria and Allerdale, and then really interesting for us, Steddlethorpe on the east coast, because it's the first non-nuclear community that's kind of started to look at it. Great geology, some challenges over there. But those 4 communities, we're in a period out till about 2025 now, where we're doing seismic studies, feasibility work, and then we'll bring a decision back to Bays in around late 25, 26 to pick the 2 front runners that we then take into a program of doing all the deep borehole drilling, full site characterization, etc. Sort of the sell on this for communities, quite tricky, as you can imagine. Interesting, an ex-colleague of mine, he's the director of the STEP program, the new fusion program, and when they launched their siting process, I think they had a long list of about 50 local authorities and whittled down very quickly to their recommended 5 that they're going to look with in terms of feasibility. There's something in the human psyche that if it's new and shiny and saving the planet and delivering power, solving climate change, that seems to be attractive. We're trying to get people to see an element of hosting this facility. Not only does it provide economic sense, jobs, some fairly tangible things quite quickly, but actually, in terms of national infrastructure that has to be hosted, this is part of the NDA's overall clean-up mission, largest environmental clean-up mission in the UK. And so it's a pretty worthwhile thing to be backing, to say that you're going to be part of a programme that will help us dispose of the nation's waste. Just a few, I think I've probably covered most of the facts and figures there. It really is about us having the patience to work with the communities. All of the last 40 years has taught us that whenever organisations or government try to enforce this into an area, then it doesn't work. And that's not just a UK experience, there's plenty of experience globally. So we really are serious this time that communities are at the heart of it. And one of my pleas to the whole of the nuclear community needs a little bit of strategic patience at times. As I said, we fired the gun in '76 and people are quibbling over whether I can shorten the timeline by a year or 2 to get to first waste in placement. Actually, the important bit is building that trust with the communities, carrying them over the line and really getting them invested in an enterprise that they're going to be proud to host and be part of for a very long time. Look forward to all the questions and the debate that we'll have on this one. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, John. We now come to our final speaker, after which we'll move to Q&A. And I was checking, there are some questions coming in on Slido, but do start putting your questions up, and upvoting questions that have already been tabled that you very much agree with, which helps us identify the key issues. Now, we're going to hear finally from Professor Paul Monks, who is the Chief Science Advisor at Bays. He delivers impartial and independent scientific advice to ministers. He is also an academic at the University of Leicester, where he remains Professor in Atmospheric Chemistry and Earth Observation Science. Paul, it's very good of you to join us this evening. Over to you.
Thank you, David. Okay, last but certainly hopefully not least, I think my job is to kind of virtually repeat everything that's gone before, but hopefully I've got some different pictures that will engage you in that. So really, new nuclear and the UK energy strategy is what we've been going to talk about tonight. I am going to remind you a little bit of why. We do need to achieve net zero by 2050. We do need to decarbonise our economy. We've heard that. This is just a graph from the CCC that is looking at the ways that we can do that. We do forget a lot about the top two. We do need to reduce demand, and we do need to increase efficiency in the way that we use energy. And I think we should always start with that. But there are a number of low-carbon solutions out there. We're going to talk a lot about electrification, but the point has been made, and I'm going to make the point again around cogeneration. There's lots of other things that come out of losing nuclear energy that we're going to need in this decarbonised energy system. That low-carbon energy, rather than electricity, is the key distinction. We're talking about energy here, not just electricity. I think I like this graph, which is the daily total energy demand of the UK. And what this looks at is on any given day how much we use in gigawatt hours. At the bottom there is the electricity, about 1,000 gigawatt hours. About 1,500 gigawatt hours in the middle there is fuel. That's the liquid energy that we use every day. And you can see the dip as we go into COVID there, as we stop using our cars. And if you want to know the challenge of the energy, I don't want to call it a crisis because we're not short of something, but the energy price crisis, I'll call it that, if you will. If that's the energy that we use in gas. We use gas to balance our load at the moment. In the peak of something like the beast from the east, that's 5 terawatt hours in a single day. And that's the energy system that we've got to have for the future. We've got to take that total amount of energy and we've got to produce it in a low carbon way. And that's the challenge that really is in front of us around this. We can look at it another way, and this has already been said. On the left-hand side here, here's the total UK energy consumption. We talk a lot about electricity as the energy that we use, but that's only 17% of what we use. Actually, we use about 40% in transport and 43% in heating. I think Julia made a really, really good point around heat as a commodity. And I think that's going to be an important feature of our future energy system. The point was also made that we're going to have a system, the energy strategy, which we're going to talk about a lot this evening, makes that point. We're going to concentrate a lot on nuclear, but you can't think of the role of nuclear without thinking about what the rest of that system is going to look like. We've got a systems problem here. It's a system that we're trying to solve, and nuclear is part of that systems approach that we're going to need to do. And as the point has been made, the more renewables you put on the system, the greater the intermittency. And the quiz question is, on my winter day, how am I going to get my 7 terawatt hours of energy? That's the quiz question. Without the lights going out, without your heating turning off, and you've got the ability in the future to charge your car. The ability to charge your car. Transport. We're going to need to double the amount of electricity, approximately in that energy equation that I've just showed you for the future, because we're going to electrify. Electrify is a good way of decarbonising. So though I've just made the case for energy, we're going to have to double the amount of electricity, and we're going to have to manage. We often, in Bays, we call the gas vampire. We often call it as it kind of goes up and down. We're sucking money out of people's pockets at the moment, which is probably not the analogy I probably want to give on this stage, I'm afraid. So to the energy strategy and BESS, as it's known colloquially. BESS is not just the kind of thing that was dreamt up overnight. It's a sense kind of built, and it has a story. It started off in November 2010 as the 10-point plan for the Green Industrial Revolution. In October 2021, as part of our COP26 efforts, we produced the Net Zero Strategy for the UK. The CCC points out, the Climate Change Committee points out that it's one of the most comprehensive strategies ever produced by a country. So actually we've embodied that, back to my systems argument here, we've embodied what we're trying to do here as part of building from the 10-point plan to net zero strategy. But what we really realised, driven by the Russia-Ukraine efforts, is that we need to think a little bit about the ambition and the scale of that ambition, and that was brought together in the British Energy Security Strategy, which really uplifted the ambition that we have, that we've been building on and thinking about and putting together, and was published as a package of ambitious measures for this secure, clean and affordable energy system. The system argument, nuclear sits in there. I don't really need to repeat this. We're going to get to 24 gigawatts by 2050, much more ambitious in the way that we build nuclear plants and the role that they have to play. Eventually, in this strategy, we want to go to 25% of our projected energy. And there's very detailed elements in terms of sites and the way that the ambition terms of the number produced permitted per year. In order to do that, you've got to change the operating model, and the strategy puts forward the Great British Nuclear as a new body in order to be able to deliver that. But also, we're going to think about the next generation of nuclear as well, beyond gigawatt, and 120 million, the Future Enabling Fund as well. And there are lots of other ambitions in this system that are all going to go on, which are going to drive a more rapid decarbonisation of our energy system by 2050 and meet the demands of changing energy usage as well. And it covers all sorts of different things. You can't just, you're going to have to change the energy system. Julia talked a little bit about the way that we have to change the financial models and the way that we put that together. So there's a huge amount of work that needs to go in. It's not just about building power plants. It's the way that we operate it, the way that we have financial models for it, the way that we then have a network that's able to distribute what is a massively different type of system of the future. And much of that is in that whole system, holistic design, a centralised strategic network plan due out later this year. You probably don't need for me to say this. We kind of been talking about this all evening. We've got the gigawatts that Julia's talked about. We've talked about SMRs and what Sophie talked about. Beyond that, we talk about AMRs, advanced modular reactors, the next generation, really designed to take forward the cogeneration that we talked about a lot tonight, designed to deliver that. And also very much at the end, we talked about fusion and the STEP process. And we are leading the STEP process, and I think we'll announce either later this year or early next year the site. We're trying to think about how to get ahead of how you produce commercial fusion energy. That's somewhere in the future. And I think there's a scale that goes through here. And I'm not going to make any judgment this evening. I'm not going to sit here and wisely say what is the correct mixture of these sort of technologies, particularly when people have very strong opinions about those sort of things as well. So SMRs, small modular reactors you've heard about. AMRs, really use those novel fuel systems for cogeneration. We've made very clear that we think that the very high temperature water reactors are the way forward. That's what we've indicated in the Future Nuclear Fund as the Future Nuclear Enabling Fund as the way forward as part of that. Partly for the same arguments that Sophie used around pressurized water reactors. This technology we know, we've got the skills, we've got the supply chain that understands the elements of that. It's just tweaking it. It's just tweaking it that will take 20 years, but it's just tweaking it that will drive that forward as part of this. I think this cogeneration piece is absolutely critical to this. Julia made the point that 65% of the energy that we create in nuclear we waste. Heat is a commodity. We're going to decarbonise. We're going to reach that scale. We've got to be more efficient in the way that we use that. We've got to have nuclear as a different part of a system where actually we want to use the base load created actually by the renewables, and we want to use the nuclear to balance that load. We kind of have to invert the logic slightly of the way that we do that. So actually there's lots of ways that we want to do, and we talked about hydrogen production, direct air capture, seawater desalination. There's also all the use of the heat, as well as other things, including making ammonia, another hydrogen vector for the future as well, which I think will be used a lot in marine as part of this. So we have a road, and I've done a why build SMRs and why build AMRs, but I think you've probably had enough of that sort of argument for this evening. They progress, and I think they show a step forward in the thinking. I finally want to come to the point of the role of R&D, and this is something that we've been working on in Bayes. This is sort of a systems diagram of the new programs that you might want to think about, but also the mature programs that we have, the sort of fleet that we'll have in the future, and the research and development that we're going to need to do that. I think we're going to have to recognise, and I think one of the key challenges, and you really struck at it by the ambition that we've heard from this platform this evening, we're going to need people to do this. We're going to need skilled people to do this. And we're going to need skilled people who know how to do nuclear operations, science, and building. And there's actually jobs for generations there, but there are skills for generations. And we should reflect that we have lost some of those skills as that population has aged, as we haven't built and operated at this sort of scale for a while. So I think we should recognise that as part of it. you know, the future may be bright, but we've got to make sure we get the people and the skills and the research and development and the understanding that gives the longevity that John talked about in the way that we think around a nuclear program. So to conclude, 2050, where will we be? Most energy will come from renewables. I mean, that's you know, let's have a look at that system. You look at in the net zero strategy, you know, a large amount comes from that. They're intermittent. They're probably going to be the cheapest way. Now, I have a view, which maybe we'll get to on costs of things a little bit later, that we tend to think about the cost of nuclear in the wrong way. We've got to think about the system cost of electricity, not the generation cost of electricity. That one part is more expensive and one part is cheap, but they can't deliver at the same time. You've got to look at the system cost of that power, and you've got to be optimizing that system cost. I think Julia said about that availability question is already beginning to drive that. We spend billions on load balancing per annum. We don't think of that as a primary cost of the electricity system, yet we have to do load balancing. It's the nature of having a system with renewables on, and that has a cost on it. So I think we've got to think a little about the levelized cost of the total system. And I think nuclear, for me, offers that trade-off between capacity, which I think will be small, actually, relatively speaking, though we can argue the strategy is 25%, which is getting to be quite big, and generation, which is a significant part of that future. So hopefully that kind of lays out, I think, some of the challenges that we face around the energy system and the transition, the systems approach that we've got to take, the challenge that Bess really puts down in the scale and the magnitude and the speed of that ambition, what we're really going to need to have to deliver that. But actually, you know, there is no harm pushing harder and faster to decarbonise our economy in a world that's going to need it. Thank you very much indeed. I can take a seat.
Thank you very much. Let me invite all of our panellists.
Shameless. Putting your Twitter thing on.
Good. And you can see there's a kind of logic. We have tried to go through the cycle on nuclear, and even with that hint on nuclear fusion from Paul at the end. And we've gotten better than the joke that it's always 30 years away. It's now 28 years away. So that's progress. So let's go through the questions. I'm going to do a couple from Slido, and then I'll, in case there are people who are not operated by Slido, we'll also have a mic for you. But the Slido question that's been upvoted the most is very interesting, and I think we're going to interpret it in a broad sense. Is it realistic to expect communities to accept SMR reactors? Nuclear is a challenge even in nuclear communities. So I'm going to start with Sophie on SMR and the extent to which you're actually going to target nuclear sites already. But then, and not everybody has to comment on every question, but there is a wider issue here, just about the wider acceptability of nuclear, which is what also makes it so slow, and whether people are optimistic about that. But you first, particularly about SMR, and do you think you're actually going to get to sites that are not currently designated for nuclear?
So it's a really interesting point, and clearly nuclear plants can only go where the communities accept them. However, what we do see is that actually where there is a need for that power or a need for those jobs, for example, to support an industry, there is a real demand and a real pull for the SMRs to be located. So we talk to communities, not just in the UK, but around the world, and especially where there is an industrial landscape that is powered currently by coal or gas. All they can see in the future is that those jobs will be gone, and there's nothing to replace them. So actually, we can see in the future industrial hubs growing up around low carbon power. So there's such a demand from industry for low carbon power, whether it be from a large plant, a small plant, anything, or even solar or wind. Actually, the industry will come to where that power is. And so communities absolutely are looking for those jobs and for that longevity of those jobs, and they're actually wanting, we think, SMRs in their region. Now, of course, it doesn't apply to everyone, but this is something that we see as a pull. The other thing is, obviously, an SMR has less impact in terms of the overall community. So we're talking about having around 500 people on site during construction for a period of around 4 years, and it's all enclosed within a factory. So actually, the day-to-day impact on the local community is much lower from an SMR.
Some people are saying you'll start with 4 SMRs on that site in Wales. Is that what's your top tip?
Again, we're a technology vendor. There's no decision yet on exactly where the first sites will be. What I can say is the same as most technology vendors. There are many sites in the UK that are absolutely suitable for the Rolls-Royce SMR, and we're in discussions with the government and others about which sites we will deploy at first.
Right. Thank you. I mean, John, do you want to comment on the sort of, because you go through all this issue of public acceptability as well?
Yeah, I think this is probably music to Sophie's ears, that you know, our evidence is that we've generated a non-nuclear community who's interested in hosting the GDF. We had other interested parties who they afforded confidentiality, who we didn't take forward because the geology wasn't right, and they were non-nuclear communities. So I would say, yeah, there is evidence that I think society is taking a different view as to what economic activity might support an area going forward. I think they're perhaps a little bit more open-minded. So I think yes.
Do you have a comment on that?
Well, I'd say that people tend to say that people don't support nuclear, but it just isn't really true. I mean, I think the last YouGov poll showed, I think 58% of the population sort of actively in favour, with relatively few actively against. In Finland, where they've just turned on an EPR, it's actually 74% in favour, and I think 12% against. I think the people who generally are not in favour of nuclear are really the commentariat. You know, when you poll people around the stations, it's very popular. Why wouldn't it be? It's quiet. It's a very good employer. It's a huge contributor to the local community. It's people in nuclear communities like it.
And presumably these local heating systems that you're now talking about,
yeah.
and you get a sense of direct local benefit.
It will embed it, and I mean, I think really the issue isn't. I mean, of course, public acceptability is its own issue, but the real issue for SMRs is actually the regulation, and it's around the rules around how close to percent of the population can you put a pressurised water reactor. And I think there's a really interesting inflection point coming up where you've seen in the press that you know, maybe the government might like the AGRs, which have been announced as closing down, to not close down. That's going to be a really interesting inflection point, because it's causing people to think about proportionality. Why are they closing? What's the harm in them closing in comparison with the risk of them staying open?
Any comments, Paul? Ministers wrestle with this?
Yeah, they do. I mean, the sins of the past are the sins of the future. I think that's what I always ask about this. But I visited a lot of areas in Newcombe. There's a lot of buy-in in those sort of those sort of communities. I think that the challenge, you know, the challenge that we haven't talked about, and part of the reason why we're going to license nuclear sites at the moment, is the challenge of security. And you know, that's one which has significant costs. So actually one of the reasons to utilise the sites is that they're already set up for that. So it's trying to kind of minimise those sort of costs.
Can I make one other comment? Just one of the things that always strikes me, we're recruiting lots of people at the moment, and one of the things that I love hearing is when we get younger people, especially graduates, come and they say they want to come and join the project, not because it's nuclear, because they want to be involved in green technology and solving the climate change problem. And I love hearing that after so many years in the industry. They don't think of it as nuclear, they think of it as green technology, and that is exactly where I think the younger generation are thinking about nuclear, and that's really positive.
I'm going to ask one other question from Slido before coming to the room, and because this actually again begins with SMRs, and you're in the phone line, but it's against a wider application, which is about technical staff and training. The specific question is whether you actually need, as you're going to need several SMRs to achieve the same output as one large nuclear plant, to aggregate all that, are more technical staff needed for SMRs? And does this make SMRs more costly? Will they be trained in time? But again, let's pick up on the wider issue that's been raised of our capacity to train the people we need.
So again, the number of staff that we need to operate the plant is commensurate. It's proportional to, I suppose, the number of staff at a large plant. Again, there's a certain base load of staff that you would need depending on the fleet. So you need your technical authority, you need obviously all your health and safety and various other things. So it's proportionate to the number of staff. What matters is how effectively and efficiently you can operate that unit. So 95% availability, producing electricity at a levelized cost of electricity, or hydrogen at a levelized cost of hydrogen that is affordable, means that you've got an efficient operation. In terms of training the staff, absolutely we need the period of time to train the staff, but obviously we have the time to be able to train the staff. Now, if we're talking about 24 gigawatts, we're talking about quite a large training program. That won't just be small, that'll be large as well. So we do need to increase the number of people who are working in this in our industry and the number of skills that we have coming through. But we've obviously got time to plan for that, and that's what we're doing.
And Paul, just bring us up to date where the government is on this. It's a strand in their thinking. What kind of training initiatives are there for a growing nuclear capability?
So generally across Net Zero is the Green Jobs Task Force, which is thinking about the jobs that we need for the net zero transition, and recognising that actually the skill base is going to change, and we go to hydrogen boilers versus gas boilers, heat pumps, etc. So the thinking is there. As part of the work that I showed you on the R&D side, we're ramping up very much the sort of thinking that we're going to need in order to deliver the nuclear skills that are going to be for the R&D base. I think Julia might have an interesting perspective. I'm not just going to hand it off on this, because actually one of the questions is the skilled workforces that have been built up around the Hinkley and Sizewell will then flow out, I think, into this market over the next few years. Although we're not starting from an absolutely low baseline, absolutely zero baseline on this as well, because of the large number of people working in the supply chain currently. I think they're going to get pulled quite heavily over the next few years, but that's not a bad thing, because these are high-skilled, high-wage jobs.
Yes, Julia, you want to comment on it?
Well, I think that if you look at the nuclear industry today, the civil nuclear industry consists of the EDF power stations, which Paul showed on his map, plus the people working at Hinkley. I mean, that's where the heritage of British Energy now is. It's in the surviving operating AGRs, Sizewell B and Hinkley Point C. Those are the only operating nuclear power stations in the UK, and they will be the only operating power stations in the UK for the next years until Hinkley turns on in 2027. So I think something for the government to really think about is ensuring cooperation. The nuclear industry tends to be very cooperative, but the government has tended, I don't mean this government in particular, governments have tended to, I think, rather overstate the benefits of competition and understate the benefits of collaboration. To get the number of people you need to staff Hinkley, Sizewell, an SMR programme, you need the existing nuclear industry to collaborate with new entrants. And if you promote too much competition, that's going to make life very difficult. So people are inclined to cooperate, people want to cooperate, people want the best for the UK. But you do need a framework within which that makes sense.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And then if you have any observations.
Yeah, I mean, this really comes more from my 30-year background operating nuclear powered submarines than it does from GDF. But, there's no doubt that the UK nuclear capability peaked at the back end of the 20th century. I did a Wikipedia tally up. We've delivered 13.5 gigawatts since the dawn of the atomic age. We now want to move on with another 24. A lot of the underlying capabilities in the technologies, material processing, post-irradiation examination, facilities like National Nuclear Laboratory, there undoubtedly needs to be a very competent strategy to generate all of the underlying people. I always remember back that when NASA went for the space program, they had 250,000 engineers on that program. So when we talk about needing to generate, it's really starting back in the education train, looking at our university sector, looking at all of the support sectors. So there has to be something matched to this strategy to ramp us back to where we were at the end of the last century, not where we are at the moment.
And when you look at the plans, and Paul, you are also active still in the world of universities as well, are you confident that in the crudest sense the sums add up, the flow of people doing the courses most relevant for nuclear engineering are going to be coming on stream when we need them?
No, I'm not confident. I'm going to be honest. I'm not. I mean, I think there is a sea change making place. I mean, I don't call nuclear green. I chair one of the green taxonomy groups, so
I think you should go for it.
but yeah, depend. So I'm gonna pull myself out of that one quite quickly and go. No, I think we're going to have to increase the ambition. I don't think we should delude ourselves that we're in the right place. It's exactly as John said. We had a peak and we've declined from it, and we're going to have to accelerate and build that skills base quite rapidly. And I mean, you could look at it, and if you look at the big picture in the university sector, the number of civil engineering courses that have closed over recent years, the number of electrical engineers that we're now short of as a country. So actually, this will be a great stimulus, I think, to those subjects. But there is going to be a supply and demand problem and timescale problem. And I don't think we should. I can't really sit here with a good heart and say, "Oh yes, Dave, it's going to be fine." You know?
Right.
And I think it's also things like high-end welding. We haven't trained welders in the UK for years. Why haven't we? We haven't trained welders because we've cut funding to further education colleges and they couldn't afford to run welding courses. We don't have high-end welders. To get high-end welding at Hinckley, we've had to open welding academies, fund welding academies to train a whole new generation of British welders. So it isn't just the nuclear engineers, it's high-end construction skills.
Yeah. Yeah, those TWI, well, it used to be called the Welding Institute, which does do some of it, but I agree, it's not sufficient. Okay, now, those were the most popular Slido questions. Now, let's go around the room, and if you could give your name and organisation as well, please, when you speak. I see you've got several. Do them in one go. Yes.
Walter Bodmer from Oxford University. I'm not an engineer, but I've been interested in this subject. And I spent 6 years as chairman of the NRPB, which had a major interest in public response to the dangers not only of nuclear energy, but of mobile phones attached to your ear and of power lines and things like that. And I'm a little surprised at the confidence that you're dealing with the public in this respect. I think there are two different aspects, as I would understand it, coming entirely new. One is just what the local attitude is, which might be more positive if there are more jobs there in that. But the other is what the overall attitude of the public as a whole is. And I think that's extremely important to keep that in mind and to have much more explanation of the value of nuclear energy and what it can give, and not and getting rid of this totally inappropriate fear of the dangers of it. And I would just ask your opinions on that and say I think there's a lot needed to be done there. Otherwise, you'll suddenly find there are huge opposition, nothing to do with where you're wanting to put a plan.
Right, very sanitary point. Let's collect some more interventions, then go through them in a group. Yes, the gentleman there.
This one's for Julia, just to give Sophie a bit of a break. You kindly went through a number.
Sorry, could you give your name?
Oh, sorry, Mark Pedersen, Director of Warwick Energy, the UK's leading independent offshore wind developer. I'm pro-nuclear under the right circumstances. My big concern is the recent change to the proposed change to the regulated asset base funding. You went through a number of the concerns, Julia. The big one that I think you missed out was the technology risk. We can argue whether Hinkley's late or not, but Flamerville certainly is, and I'm not sure the finished plant's operating yet. So, you know, the UK consumer is about to start paying for a technology that may never deliver a single kilowatt hour onto the grid because you haven't got a proven technology. Could you? I know you're not an engineer, but if you could provide any reassurance on that would be very useful.
Let's go back to a couple more. That's a bold challenge. And there's a couple more in that corner. We'll get those, yeah.
Good evening. Martin Freer, University of Birmingham. So my question is around the fuel cycle. So we are in an age of an open fuel cycle. Several decades ago, we had the capacity around a closed fuel cycle. So we had a MOX plant, we had a reprocessing plant, we had a fast reactor program. Is the open cycle, given that uranium is a finite resource, maybe it's got another 100 years or so to run, is really an open cycle the right approach? So do we have the right UK strategy around the fuel cycle?
Right, very interesting. And then, yes, in the corner.
Hi, Dan Garbett, the rolling programme of decommissioning technical strategy lead for Magnox, part of the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority. So it's a bit of a question to the panel, the sort of growing focus on sustainability and obviously the fact that nuclear may play quite an important role in that is front and centre at the moment. So it's clear from the sustainability challenges that we face as a country and as a planet, they're not sector specific. So, you know, how does the panel see collaboration outside of the nuclear family on some of those shared challenges that we have to deliver the projects, such as, I think, Sophie, you mentioned the capabilities across your supply chain, and also as well, you know, with the supply chain at EDF, you know, how important are those relationships, and what do we see? How do we improve bringing those relationships to the fore to deliver some of the complex challenges in nuclear?
Right, that's a great range of questions. Everybody doesn't have to answer every question, but perhaps, Julia, you might engage with the question whether or not you've got a technology that's going to work or not.
So around the world, there are literally no reactors which have not turned on for purely technical reasons. So there are reactors which have not turned on because of their political reasons, because economics have shifted against them, because the bill's not gone well and the economics have shifted such that people have stopped. There are no reactors which have not turned on. And that's an agreed position with government, in which there are plenty of reports. So what's an EPR? An EPR is a pressurised water reactor, of which there are hundreds around the world, and they have on average 91% availability. So they're a very well-known technology. Does the EPR work? Yes, the EPR works. So in Finland, yes, it's late, but it's on. It's going to provide about 14% of Finland's electricity. It's branded as being Finland's greatest climate act. As I said before, Finland has currently got 74% public favourability to nuclear, based on this having turned on, giving them energy security against Russia. In Taishan, the two plants were actually top rated by the World Nuclear WANO, the World Association of Nuclear Operators. They do have a problem with the fuel design. It's not that uncommon to have a problem with fuel design at the start of a reactor build. Those two plants will come back on there. It'd be absolutely fantastic, putting out vast quantities of low-carbon electricity in China, and we should be very glad that they're there, because otherwise that power would be replaced by coal and gas. Flamanville 3 is not a success story. I'm not purporting to defend Flamanville 3. It was a prototype. Many things have gone wrong. It's well understood what's gone wrong, and Hinkley benefits from it. And if you look at, around the world, a PWR versus a UK EPR, adapted to UK design, I'd basically use the analogy of a car. The PWR is like the engine. It's basically the same, or pretty much whatever design you're using, if it's a pressurised water reactor. And the UK adaptation sort of changed the body, as we've changed the steering wheel to the other side. We've got a slightly different braking system, and we're meeting the requirements of the UK regulator. But it's a very, very well understood technology, of which they do all work. Right.
Do you want to comment? I mean, I know. Let's move along, because that was a very thorough answer. Sophie, why don't you pick up perhaps the fuel cycle question, and also this issue about capabilities across the wider supply chain?
Yeah, can do. So certainly in terms of the fuel cycle, totally agree with you. In terms of actually, wouldn't it be a great thing to have a closed fuel cycle? I agree. However, at this point in time, from a technology perspective and from an economic perspective, it's not necessarily a sensible thing for us to start to introduce when we're trying to deploy a vast number of reactors. What we need to do at this stage is have low risk in terms of licensing and operation. And the way to do that is to use technology that we already know exists, as Julia said, pressurised water reactor technology, and fuel that we already know is manufacturable, operators are used to using, and actually we can manage with the waste afterwards. So certainly in terms of our technology roadmap, we're looking at how we might use recycled fuels, other forms of fuels, accident-tolerant fuel, all of those types of fuels. And as they're developed and their technology readiness level goes up to a point at which it's economically sensible for us to introduce them into the cycle, certainly we're looking to do that, and I'm pretty certain that EDF are doing exactly the same, and other vendors as well. So we're all looking for this, but actually we have to balance what is right from a technology perspective with what's right from an economic perspective. And from a risk perspective in terms of introducing those into the cycle. So yeah, absolutely brilliant for the future. We're keeping our eyes watching all of those, but we have to use what's available today to be able to make an economic solution. And then just in terms of pulling in capabilities for others, absolutely. Nuclear is not a special industry. There is a little bit of the nuclear plant that is nuclear. The majority of the power station is a power station. The majority of construction is construction with a little bit of nuclear added on. Why on earth would we not look at other industries and other sectors? So we've been working very heavily with shipbuilders. Shipbuilders are have some of the best experience of modularization of any industry. Why wouldn't we look at shipbuilding? Why wouldn't we look at other sectors? The INC system that we're looking at comes from aerospace. Oh my, and it's also used in some of our defence applications. Why wouldn't we use a system that's already qualified for some of the harshest environments in the world that you can put an INC system in and just use it in nuclear? That's a much lower risk. So actually, absolutely, it's really important that we don't treat nuclear as special, except where nuclear needs to be treated as special, because otherwise we just introduce risk, introduce cost, and we're not getting a good economic solution. So absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. John?
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit. So there are significant quantities of material that are not yet deemed waste, but we're planning they may go to a GDF. So I'm talking about the significant inventory of unprocessed spent fuel, the 150 tonnes of plutonium that we have in this country, and probably the biggest part is the 150,000 tonnes of depleted natural low enriched uranium, all of which could go into a closed cycle and fast breeder reactors. Really all we're doing in terms of managing this problem, all of that inventory I've talked about is not designated to go to a GDF until at least 2080 and beyond. So really, I think we've got a lot of water to flow under the bridge before that. How is the planet dealing with the climate crisis? What is our real landscape for nuclear over the next 60? Will we end up in a fast breeder program? We're not disposing of those materials early on, so they remain available should there be a change into a closed cycling fast breeders, and that seems like a common sense thing to do for me.
Julia? Yeah, very interesting.
Well, there are people who are bringing forward those designs. I'm a non-executive director. I'm not here to give them a plug, but there's an Italian company called Nucleo which wants to do exactly what John's saying, which is to burn plutonium. Yeah. They want the UK to reintroduce MOX. They're actually, as it happens, self-funding because they've raised a lot of money because people find their ideas exciting in the way that they find fusion exciting. I mean, as Sophie says, and as John said, we've got to get on with what we can build today. But absolutely, they're very, very keen to make sure that, as John says, the plutonium remains available for the option, and they're very keen to also, as Sophie said, get hold of a site, a challenge, and get going.
When we look at UK's comparative advantage across a whole range of technologies and sectors, we sometimes realise that by virtue of being there first, thereby having a lot of old stuff, paradoxically, that creates some distinctive comparative advantages. Yeah. So, for example, nuclear decommissioning services are a very good export industry for us because we have wrestled with how you decommission old nuclear plants. And so being a leader, and I genuinely don't quite know how much the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority plays into this, being a leader in both decommissioning and reusing stuff left over from older, dirtier processes is a good thing to focus on. Do you think we're taking enough of that opportunity?
I think it's NDA is a key strand. I mean, NDA is an enterprise which includes Sellafield, Magnox, etc. It costs the nation about £3.25 billion a year. We've developed immense skills in that enterprise, wrestling with some very difficult challenges in places like Dounreay and Sellafield. It's absolutely on the radar as to how we can capitalise on that and market those skills more widely around the world, because we have probably one of the leading decommissioning industries on the planet, and it's hard work to figure out how to do some of this stuff, particularly with the older facilities. all of the new plants being educated today are being designed and built utterly with decommissioning at the front of people's thoughts. That wasn't the case back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, etc. So some of the things that were put together were not really designed for decommissioning. So those challenges have really kind of got us into a cutting-edge space where we're pretty good at doing it now.
David, I could just add, I mean, it goes further than that as well. You know, it's using the novel materials that we have to make novel radionuclides that we're using in the medical radioisotopes area. So actually, NDA's done some great research, you know, on how to convert that waste into other things as well, while they're trying to turn it into more passive ways, so you don't have to store it. You know, it's still, you know, a large problem again, you know, but there are many good things that come out of the science and the engineering that we're working in the nuclear disposal industry. But I think the point that John made, that you know, we now design reactors to take them apart. You know, we're world leaders in robotics technologies and the way that we use robotics, you know, for this. So it is a new. It's not. I don't want to call it a new industry, but you can't judge it solely by its past.
Yeah. A final set of questions from the room, because we are getting towards the end of our time. Yes, over there and then here. Yes. Oh, sorry, there's two over there. Yeah, we'll get them all in if they're brief, and we will then have...
Tony Ralston, University of Cambridge. Disclaimer, I am a nuclear engineer. First statement, we can get very enthusiastic about nuclear among friends here. Today, nuclear has a cost problem. And I want to ask a question about that. There are some ways of dealing with it, and Lord Bennett's mentioned in 1975, President of France signed his decree. 15 years later, they built 50 PWRs, and the program approach is perhaps the answer. Whether it's a large reactor or a small reactor. But I wanted to ask a question to Julia. She gave the impression, I would like to clarify the point about nuclear as part of the mix with renewables. Can I just clarify that it doesn't mean that nuclear can be on the grid even if it's more expensive than the whole system cost of renewables? Or I just want to clear that we are talking about onions and onions, not onions and apples, that nuclear will only be on the grid if it's cost competitive, taking everything into account.
Let's just collect a couple more. Yes, and so I think there was another question around... Oh, yes, right. Sorry, right, yes, certainly.
Hello, I'm Patrick McHugh, a member of the Foundation and also a nuclear engineer. I began my career in France working on the nuclear program in the 1970s. My question is, I think, very critical. I'm a resident of Anglesey, where Wilfer is.
That's the one I was thinking of. Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of.
Great place.
I've got a great challenge for you. It's not about the local community is very keen. We heard about the burying the waste and how the community saw perspective to get an income in the community. That's why Anglesey is interested in doing it. The problem they have is there is not a competence on the island to accept the technology which is coming to them. It's just someone's going to give us some money. We have to build a local competence that will then draw the people, us in. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we might do that.
Right. Then there was another question up, I think, at the far end, and then we'll move across. Yeah, there's a... Yeah.
Mark Jacob Defra. Many of the panel made reference to the potential for climate change mitigation from the new nuclear. But one consideration I've not seen mentioned beyond climate change mitigation is the matter of climate change adaptation. So much of this discussion about new nuclear is talking about decadal, even century lifespans. But I've seen with many existing plants globally, the coolant systems can't deal with the reality of a warming climate. So to what extent and over what time frames has that been built into the calculations?
Right, yeah, and we're allowing for the effects of climate change. And I think there was, yes, question here. Right.
Thank you. It's Peter Marsh of Made Here Now. It's another question really on the disposal issue of the waste. I mean, it seems to me, as a dispassionate observer, really, no matter how hard you sell nuclear power, you're always going to come back to this issue that you are trying to create an industry that it just can't live without producing huge quantities of some of the most dangerous material you could ever visualize. Now, given that you've got some disposal ideas, just how many of these disposal sites, for John, do you actually need? I mean, could you get by with just these 3 communities who are used to nuclear power and the disposal elements of it in Cumberland, or Cumbria, I should say? I mean, or do you need loads of them? I mean, could you just, if you like, persuade or bribe or whatever, the communities there to accept these and just live with that, perhaps burying deeper and deeper into the earth to get rid of this stuff? Or do you really need loads of them dotted around the country?
Right, disposal. And I'm going to take the liberty of adding one other question, which partly prompted by disposal, because there are some nuclear technologies that don't have a disposal problem, nuclear fusion. And of course, there is a case for SMRs leading on to very advanced nuclear reactors. I don't understand the science and engineering, but the suggestion is you actually have a convergence, and some of the work you do on SMRs and then more advanced reactors are themselves crucial for nuclear fusion. And so does anybody on the panel think we might get to nuclear fusion before 2050 and see the technologies they're working on today as helping to make that possible? I'd like to throw that in. But Sophie, why don't we start with you?
On fusion?
Well, on fusion, but also pick up on one or two of them. I think the issue about whether you're going to get your SMRs at Anglesey would be a good one.
So fusion, if I start with fusion, again, we have worked with the fusion programme, absolutely brilliant programme. I think the really interesting thing from our perspective is about the commercialisation. So again, the fusion reactor is just a kettle in the middle, in the same way that a fission reactor is just a kettle in the middle. The question is, how do you develop the rest of the power station around it? And that's one of the areas of real interest in terms of actually, if we come up with an economic solution to delivering a power station, whether it be the kettle in the middle is a PWR or a fusion plant or whatever, is that a technology that the UK, that capability that the UK then has, that it can apply to multiple different plants. So that's what I would say about fusion. I don't want to comment on when the actual fusion reactor will be ready, although I know they're making great progress. So
in
that's
28
really,
years' time.
yeah. Just in terms of Anglesey, I think, again, you're absolutely right. One of the key things is about the skills for the plant. One of the advantages of manufacturing a plant in the way that we're talking about for SMRs, or our particular type of SMR, is most of the skills that are needed for the manufacture, for the development of that plant, are actually in the factories. And the factories don't move. So wherever we put the factories, that's where we're going to have the skills really building up for decades. Decades of knowledge and capability built up in those communities around the factories. And then we take the product from those factories and we deploy it in different parts of the world. So we're not talking, if we hopefully get the opportunity to build plants at Anglesey, we're not talking about needing lots and lots of people in that one location to build up those skills. What we of course will need is we'll need a smaller number of people, as I said, maximum 500 on site for a period of about 4 years. We'll need those people for that short length of time. And of course, we'll need the operator capability, which is around 300-ish people, operator capability, including the technical authority and various other things. So we will need those skills that will need to be built up over the time. And also, obviously, we'll need to develop the skills of an operator, because the UK at the moment doesn't have a state utility in the way that some other countries do. So we definitely need to have that. Now, that could be EDF, it could be others. Obviously, one of our shareholders is Constellation, who is an existing operator. So again, there are certain skills we need to build up, but because we have a factory-based approach, it means those skills can stay put for generations, and that's an advantage.
David, can I come in on fusion?
Right, yeah.
We want to stay on the fusion for a second. I don't want to be accused of sort of being kind of pie in the sky, but it is actually a real UK success story. Yeah. It is something that we invest at JET and Culham and UKAA, something significantly. We talk often about doing moonshots. Actually, we are doing moonshots for fusion in the UK. Actually, companies are now coming into the UK because they recognise that it's the place to do the fusion commercialisation. First Light Fusion, General Fusion, all moved to the UK because it's the place to do it. So actually, we have a success story on our hands around this that we play down. Now, we all do the 28 years till fusion joke because I think we should be cautious about playing that technology into the mix. It's fair to the gentleman that said earlier about, we've got to have some sort of proof of that working. But I think we should recognise that we have a really good story around fusion. Yes, it's driven out of science. Yes, it's driven out of robotics. But yes, also it's driven about driving commercial inward investment into the UK as well. And the STEP programme, I mean, when somebody first said to me, we're going to build a first fusion station by 2035, I said, what? That's a mad idea. But actually, when you think about it, it's exactly what Sophie said. You've got to get all the rest of the stuff to work. So actually, I think it is a story that we should be proud of, and though cautious.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased you said that. I agree. I think 2035 is what people are now beginning to talk about, and it's a serious prospect. John, do you want to comment particularly on that issue from Peter Marsh about disposal?
Yes,
and waste.
And can I also just touch on the question from the gentleman from DEFRA in terms of are we baking in future climate changes to our designs? Absolutely. You saw from my slides, a lot of our places we're looking at coastal areas, as with nuclear power stations. So yeah, we're looking out, several hundred years, worst case flooding. What do we have to do to build facilities? I'd also sort of just like to add that we're looking at the GDF from a real tough lens on sustainability. We could be lazy and just claim credit for we shut down carbon generating activity elsewhere in terms of storage, but we're pretty determined. We think our license to operate in the time we'll be building will be reliant on a pretty stellar demonstration that we're building low carbon infrastructure, which touches to the question from Dan Garbett. So low carbon cement, steel, etc., fundamental in terms of building infrastructure in that time in a low carbon way. In terms of the site itself, and the communities working with, we are down selecting to one site to develop. That one site, using a block of geology, 6 by 6 kilometres, that'll probably last this country certainly through the whole of this century and the 20th century waste. So in around 2200, someone might be thinking about where's site 2 for the next GDF, but we don't need a lot of sites. You're right, it's dangerous waste, but there isn't that much of it when you get into the geological space to dispose of.
You've got to prompt a late intervention.
Sorry.
Nigel, yes. The mic's just to your right. Yeah.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Nigel Wilson. I'm the Chief Executive of Legal & General, and I'm probably the least well-informed person in the room on this particular topic. But what I can say is that we've been pretty big investors in offshore wind, onshore wind, in solar, in ground source heating, in air source heating. We've also helped to finance the nuclear fusion program here in the UK. And we're definitely in the 2035, not the 2050 box. I think they've got a network effect. And the network effect that they've got is very different from the two areas that you were working on, where everybody's cooperating across the world in a very constructive way and accelerating. And we had that network effect in solar. If you read the work that Nick Stern and others did in a bygone era, the forecasting errors were huge on the wrong side. Costs have come down much quicker than anybody expected in this. And I think that, again, is a massive network effect. I think there's a lot of work to do in this area. We'd love to figure out how we can get involved in financing. But at the moment, we're not financing either SMRs or on the nuclear plants. And EDF are our partners in PodPoint, which is our electric vehicle charging business. And so somehow these two industries have to appeal much more to the financing community. And as I said to David, I'm probably the only person in the room who has a lot of money to invest in these sorts of activities. That's why I hate revealing myself. But since I know David so well around this, and I think the point that Paul made is a really good one. There's new generation technologies, and the UK is getting a second bite to invest in so many areas right now, because our science and technologies are amazing over here, not just in Oxford and Cambridge, but in many other universities, Birmingham, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's super exciting because our universities are accelerating their capability, and that's allowing us to have these huge investment opportunities. And we have to decide, we're referring to my own firm there, where we invest big in these different areas, and so have a proper dialogue with all of the experts in the industry. So I don't really have a question other than how do we interface more with you, and because what I find hard is that are we describing the situational analysis correctly? And so our perception of what you've described as a situational analysis is different from the one we have. We are great friends with EDF, but when you look at the success they've had on their programs, the Finnish one was supposed to be finished in 2009. It's 4 times over budget. When we're investing pension money for people, we'd find that pretty difficult as a proposition to invest in, because we need some greater degree of certainty on what the outcome is of that. And similarly, offshore wind has proven itself to be brilliant. I mean, the UK is very lucky. They've got very shallow water with very predictable winds. So it's, in terms of a globally competitive advantage, that's fantastic. And the size and scale of the facilities and the decrease in cost you get, which is exponential from that technology, is just amazing. So I think there's a very big picture. Where do we want to invest in? Not just in this industry, but in many other industries as well. And it's great when you get this community of incredible knowledge. And how do we get the network effect into both the two nuclear options which are in offer here? Because we would have a different pitch from Westinghouse, and so if Westinghouse were here, they would have a different.
Well, that is a very encouraging intervention, Nigel. You're always welcome to FST meetings, and it's great. And it's a very fair challenge actually for Julia, who's one person who hasn't come in this final round, because also you were asked earlier on as well. There was a question really for you about cost, which then there's the wider challenge, making nuclear an investable proposition. So the final word to you.
Well, it's great to have Nigel in the room for this. So turning first to cost. So I mean, people in the room won't follow nuclear news as closely as I do, but you'll have seen that yesterday the government published its reasons for why is it minded, subject to consultation, to give a regulated asset-based licence to Sizewell. And it's because, as I said, it brings down household bills, even though it is, as a generating unit, a more expensive unit than wind. So why does it bring down household bills? And the level of understanding of household electricity bills is really amazingly low. And I've had to go and talk to the BBC's energy correspondents about, what's a bill made up of? Well, it's made up of generation. Yes, we have more expensive generation. We are more expensive to generate than offshore wind. It's made up of transmission. A lot cheaper to transmit our electricity because it's onshore. Distribution, probably pretty neutral, but actually not completely neutral, but that's not a swing factor. Balancing. That's a massive, massive factor. I can't remember what the figure is, but constraint payments, so payments to wind farms, because the grid didn't want their electricity, reached some very, very high figure, which Paul probably doesn't want to confirm. Very high figure, and they're going to have to change the constraint system. When they change the constraint system, that will put up the costs of wind electricity because it won't be being paid on days when it could have generated because it was windy, but it didn't. That's not to criticise the offshore industry. It's a huge success. It's great. But it's to explain why does your household bill go down if you build some nuclear, even though the nuclear electricity power station is obviously more expensive to build than an offshore wind farm. So if our overall aim as good citizens is to bring down low carbon electricity and pricing and household bills, you have to look at it systemically, as Paul said. The fact is that the government will go ahead with Sizewell C because it will bring down people's electricity bills, even if it's expensive to build. So, and then why else would it? Well, it's because it can put out heat, because it will contribute to making electrolysis much more efficient, because it's a good thing to have continuous electricity. We have, as I said, enormous UK content of through life of 90%, and because we are like a jobs factory. So we train people, we have 1,500 apprentices, we employ people who come from harder to access work backgrounds. So it's a very good social value project, and it will have life cycle carbon emissions of 5.5 grams, which is roughly half the level attributed by the IPCC to wind. So those are all the reasons to do it, but primarily because it brings down bills while giving you electricity. Why is it investable under the RAV model? So the first, I think what I'd say, Nigel, is that we couldn't have a RAB model. We couldn't be awarded a RAB licence if the government didn't have confidence that having built Hinckley Unit 1 and showing the progress on Hinckley Unit 2, Sizewell would show equivalent productivity benefits as between 1 and 2, and that therefore they can be confident as to the range within which it will come out. And from an investment point of view, it will have investment grade debt, so that will have the risk characteristics attributable to investment grade debt. And in terms of the equity, what the RAB model produces is a capped upside and a capped downside. So the equity will get a return within a range. It will be heavily incentivised to bring it in on time and on budget, but there'll be no question that anybody imagines equity will invest if there's any risk at all of losing their shirt. This is designed for low-cost pension fund investment to create a virtuous circle of pension fund money, funds, apprenticeships, jobs, and that produces a stable CPI-linked and extremely predictable and very long-term return. So it's being designed for investment, and you know, we obviously wouldn't have got this far if this wasn't likely to produce, going to produce investment-grade debt and a bounded equity return.
Excellent. I think we can sense there may be a conversation starting as we observe. That was an excellent answer. Thank you all very much to our panellists for a really lively discussion, and thank you to all your participation and your questions. Thank you very much indeed. Our next webinar will be on scenarios for science superpower, and we've got an event on the 13th of July here on health policy implications of climate change, including Chris Whitty as one of our speakers. And very much look forward to seeing you then. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you.
Yeah.